From your local grocer, this is Kurt Berglund with a Pine Tar Baseball Negro League's Great Team Set wrap-up video for you today. This video will go through the basics about the set, some information about the Negro Leagues, and why we think it's a fun one for you to check out on Kickstarter and pick up for yourself. As I record this, there are 3 days left in the Kickstarter for you to get involved. That's plenty of time to check it out. I will put the link below in the video description so that you can easily find it when you are done viewing this video. The video series that we have done on the 12 teams in the Kickstarter and the one free team that you can pick up for yourself has been really for two purposes. One is to tell you about the Kickstarter, and two is to give you a resource to look at after you buy the teams, something to refer back to if you're not that familiar with what that team did, who was on the team, and so on. And I'll talk more about how we handled that in just a few minutes. For right now, I'm just back from the grocery store, and I'm wondering, why is there an expiration date on this bottle of water? It's water, I think. The label tells us it's best before November of 2021. Is that because of the plastic? If it is, should we really be drinking water out of these things? I have so many questions. The grocery store loves me. All right, let's talk about how these cards were made. The first part is the quantitative data, and for that, we looked at seamheads.com. It's your best single source of data for Negro Leagues baseball, and if you haven't been there, I encourage you to check out seamheads.com. For qualitative data, I looked at books. Every single player in the set was researched before I made his card. So you get a combination in these cards of the numbers from Seamheads and then what others wrote about them as best I could find in the source material that I used. So let's show you the source material. The first place that I started was the Bill James Historical Baseball Abstract. There is a chapter in here on Negro Leagues baseball. There is also position by position breakdown of how the best Negro Leaguers matched up and ranked at each position with their Major League Baseball counterparts. Lots of good stuff is in here. A really good starting point for my research. Second one you've seen me show you before. It's the complete book of baseball's Negro Leagues. It's written by John Hallway. I think it's about 25 years old if I'm not mistaken. It's a little hard to find, but it's a great pickup. Information is broken out. Statistical data is dated, because Seamheads has exceeded this book. But the write-ups on the seasons and the World Series play and just sort of developments in the game, this is an indispensable book on the Negro Leagues. Third, you've also seen me show you, it's this one. Probably used this one the most, the Biographical Encyclopedia Baseball Negro Leagues by James Riley. All players, great and small. There were a few that I looked up that weren't in here, but not very many. And it really helped not only with batting orders, but also with what the players were like, how they were used, when their peaks were, what problems they had, and so on. It's a very, very good source. This book, the Negro Leagues book, Volume 2, the first one is good too, but this one was really helpful. It has a lot of different sections on it, pointed me in the right direction on team rosters, and player names and sort of who I was looking for, and if I got stuck, this was really helpful. And it's only about, I want to say, 2 months old, and available on Amazon if you'd like to pick it up. Black Baseball's National Showcase by Larry Lester is about the East-West game. This is great help, was great help for me about the talents of individual players, especially, obviously, the all-star caliber players, because the East-West game was their all-star game starting in 1933. I could read this nonstop, just page after page of interesting information that teaches so much about the Negro Leagues. This is Phil Dixon's book about the 1931 Homestead Grays. If you're interested in that team, I encourage you to pick it up. Lots of information here about how the game was played, but of course focusing on the Grays themselves and what makes them arguably the best team of all time. Ultimately, of course, you'll determine that in your simulation use. This is a book that is a little bit controversial, but I found it helpful. Baseball's Other All-Stars by William McNeil. Covers, I used it actually in creating the Japanese card set as well, but the Negro Leagues are covered in this book as well, and it gives me an idea of how to rank players and where they kind of fell in terms of ability, and that was helpful to support the quantitative data. And then this one is one I picked up just this winter, Few and Chosen by Monty Irvin. There's not a lot in here that really helped me with the cards, but it's a great book, and I wanted to show it to you. Few and Chosen by Monty Irvin. Monty goes through and ranks all-time players at positions, talks a little bit about teams, and it's really interesting from his perspective as a former player. So, for quantitative data, we had seamheads.com, and for qualitative data, we had all the books that I just showed you. And if you're interested about any of those books and I showed them too quickly, send me a note and I'll be sure to send you out a reply with a list of the sources that we used. All right. If you've not been to PineTarBaseball website, ttlbaseballgame.com, that is the simulation that drives this card set. The card stock, it looks like this. It is a regular playing card stock. This is from the 1979 World Series set. It's Eddie Murray's card, but you can see it has rounded corners like a playing card does, and it's shiny like a playing card is, and it's thick. You can hear me snap this, and you know that that's what you're going to be getting these cards on for each of the players on these teams. What teams, you say? Well, let's go through the teams that are in the set. They are the 1910 Chicago Lelands, the 1917 Chicago American Giants, the 1924 Kansas City Monarchs, the 1925 Hilldale Club or Hilldale Daisies, 1928 St. Louis Stars, 1929 Baltimore Black Sox, 1931 Homestead Grays, 1933 Chicago American Giants, 1935 Pittsburgh Crawfords, 1942 Kansas City Monarchs, 1946 Newark Eagles, and 1947 New York Cubans. The free team that you can get just for emailing me or by joining the Pine Tar Baseball Facebook page and looking in the files section, you can get the 1934 Philadelphia Stars for free. That'll give you 13 great Negro Leagues teams for your tournament or season replay use. Which brings me to my next topic, and that is, how could you use these teams? Well, in the Kickstarter, there are 12 teams. You can set them up into regional divisions, if you wanted to do that, you could certainly go east-west, as would make sense, and it would also set up some interesting all-star game competition for yourself if you would be interested in doing that. Simply by taking the 3 Chicago teams, the 1910 Chicago Lelands, the 1917 Chicago American Giants, the 1933 Chicago American Giants, adding to them the 2 Kansas City Monarch teams from 1924 and 1942, plus the 1928 St. Louis Stars, and that would give you the Western Division. Those 6 teams would make up the Western Division. Everyone else would be in the East. That's, frankly, what I'm going to do when I do my season with these guys. 6 and 6, well, 6 and 7, because I'm going to put the Philadelphia Stars in there as well. They'll be in the East. So 7 in the East, 6 in the West. If you wanted to do a tournament, all you'd have to do with 12 teams is to give 4 of the teams a first-round bye and then have the other 8 teams play in the first round to reach the second round. That cuts you down to, if you go 8, the bottom, if you want to say that, the bottom 8, play them against each other. That brings you to 4. And then you'd have the 4 teams that you give a bye to, and you'd pair them up, and you'd have 8 teams, and 8 goes down to 4, and 4 goes down to 2, and then you eventually have your champion. So if you wanted to do a tournament, you could do it very, very easily that way as well, just by setting up a first-round bye for 4 of the teams. Let's talk about Negro Leagues baseball. We have several themes throughout the videos that we've done. We've done an introductory video plus 13 videos on these 13 teams plus this wrap-up video. And one of the themes that I've been repeating each time is that the rosters in Negro Leagues baseball were shorter, as you probably know. With a low of 14 in the set to a high of 19 in the set, we're talking about shorter rosters, typically 6-man pitching staffs, although a couple of the staffs have 5 pitchers. And the thinking here is, well, 2 things are going on. One is that the owners didn't want to pay as large of a roster, couldn't afford to pay as large of a roster as existed on major league teams, number one. Number two, the pitchers on these rosters were expected to go the distance. And so complete games were definitely the rule of the day, but there were relief pitchers used. Sometimes they were starters on their off day who would come in. And so the vast majority of the pitchers in the set, you will see, have starting pitcher ratings as well as relief pitcher ratings. So you'll be able to use them in both ways, unless the data showed they were only used as a starter for some reason. And in that case, they only received the starter designation. In Negro Leagues baseball, one-run strategies were definitely emphasized. That means you'll have the opportunity to steal, bunt, and hit and run, and you'll be encouraged to do so. These folks ran a lot, and the order of the day was to put pressure on the defense, and that the defense would not sometimes respond very well, especially if it was not a great team that they were playing against. You could force the defense of a lesser team into making mistakes, and so the better teams would eventually blow them out. Once we get past the 1910s and early 1920s, the addition of power, the lively ball era begins, and power becomes a key part of the offense as well. But they didn't abandon the one-run strategies, so you have a combination of aggressive base running, first-run strategies, stolen bases, hit and run, with tremendous power produced by at least some of the hitters in each roster. Relief pitcher usage in Negro Leagues baseball I mentioned briefly, but typically it was mop-up duty, except for in big games, those starters would come in during their off games to finish up for pitchers who had lost their stuff or had gotten tired. The bench is short, and so pinch hitter usage has to be judicious. You have to really pick your spots. There will be some backup players on each team. Typically, the very, very best players on each team started, and there was a reason why the bench players were on the bench. With a 16-man roster, you're talking about, on the average, you're talking about 8 position players, 6 pitchers, so maybe you've got a couple of pinch hitters, position player pinch hitter types. One of them typically was a backup catcher. When you get your cards, it's important that you look at the pitcher hitting cards, because each pitcher is also calculated to show how good a hitter he was, and you should look to see if that pitcher played other positions in the field. That'll give your bench additional flexibility, but if you don't look on the cards carefully, you won't see those ratings, and you might miss some pitchers who also played significant time in the field. All right, if you get this set, and I hope you do, I have written a PDF document that includes a couple of pages of information about Negro Leagues baseball and how it was played generally. Then I give you 1 page on each of the 12 teams. And if you ask me for the Philadelphia Stars, I have a 1-page document for them too. Each page on each team tells you their roster. It tells you their team accomplishments. Did they win their league? Did they win the World Series? Did they do both? Was it a split season? Did they win one half but not the other? I'll tell you all that. You get their team historical rankings. How do Negro Leagues historians rank this team generally among the greats in Negro Leagues history? You get the roster, I think I said that, and you get a frequently used team batting order. So if you don't know the team very well, you get something to start with, and then of course you can always tweak it to your content, but I thought that might be interesting for you to look at. If you get the card set, you're going to learn much more about how Negro Leagues baseball was played, and you're going to learn, of course, about the great players, what made them great, what their skills were like, and you're going to learn about the great teams. You will develop an impression, I think, of which team was the best or which teams were on the top tier of great teams. Now that I've done videos on all 12 teams and I've made the case for all of them being the best team or the worst team in the 12-team set, I've got to tell you I'm more confused than ever about who I think the best team of these 12 or 13 might be. So it's going to be interesting to see what you think, and I certainly hope you share your results with me either by email or on the Facebook page or both. You're also going to learn a great deal, I think, about how baseball was played in the Negro Leagues, far more than you could get by reading it. That's what a good simulation does. It's a representation of reality, and it's going to teach you about the game, and I think that'll be very interesting to you. But most of all, you're going to have fun with the cards, and you're going to have fun with these teams. They're going to be interesting series and games, and I think that you're really going to value these cards as part of your collection. But to get them, you have to go to the Kickstarter, and that's going to be linked below. You have to check out Pine Tar Baseball at ttlbaseballgame.com. ttlbaseballgame.com. If you have questions about the cards or the set, please drop me an email, and I'll put that email below as well for you to fire off questions for me. I think that's it. Oh, and don't forget to ask me for the Philadelphia Stars set. I've started using them already in some games against other teams, and I'm having a blast with them. So I hope you ask me for them and pick them up for your collection for free as well. Check out the Kickstarter. We're down to 3 days. Clock is running, so we need your help to make this set a reality, so we appreciate that. Check out the Kickstarter and let us know if you have questions. I really enjoyed putting this series together for you. I hope you've learned something, and I hope that it's helped you make a good decision about whether you'd like to buy the set. My name's Kurt Berglund. Please click like and subscribe to my channel. There will be more videos coming very, very soon. Thank you again. Have a good day. So long, everybody.